So welcome. Thanks for coming along. As Rebecca just mentioned, this is our final workshop about the manual, the sketch manual, but we will be coming back in September and from then on talking about works in progress of people's sketches in progress and having us just sort of a time to come and discuss. So today we're talking about community reports. Very exciting that it's the last section of the manual, I have to say. So the focus of previous seminars, as you know, it's been how to produce an academic report of language acquisition in a community. Well, the focus of previous seminars looking at the second part of the manual, obviously not the data collection part. The focus of today's seminar is how to report findings of your sketch back to that community. So it will be a fairly brief presentation today. We'll talk about some factors for you to consider. We'll have some examples of outputs for communities, and hopefully it'll lead to a really rich discussion at the end. So as you can see here, I have used the term report and output on the one slide. You might be a bit confused by that. What do I mean? Which one is it? Well, they're different, of course, but today they're being used somewhat interchangeably because essentially we're talking about vehicles to relay information from your research back to the community members in a meaningful, context-appropriate way, which is our focus. So is a community report necessary? It is a crucial part of the sketch writing process. And it is absolutely imperative that the knowledge gained from your sketch is delivered back to the community. And I'm sure everyone who is here agrees with this. That's why you're here. The findings from your sketch can be of real value to the community, but as we always say, every single workshop, be careful not to generalize too much from your findings. Now, this might be easier said than done when you're creating outputs for the community because you will have to reduce detail greatly. And so it might be hard not to generalize or to word something in a way that other people generalize from it. Obviously, you can't control what other people do, but just be mindful of the potential for people to generalize. So what do we do for a community report and how do we do it? The language you choose for your sketch, by definition, will have very little research-based information on its acquisition. That's why you're doing the sketch. And very probably it won't have many education resources. But despite these similarities across the languages that are having sketches done of them, there is no convenient one-size-fits-all way of appropriately giving information back to communities, unfortunately. It is entirely dependent on the specific language community you are working with and their particular needs and wants. So we can't just give you a template that you can use. That'd be very easy. So a great deal of thought and consultation with community members and care is needed to decide what form or forms your feedback should take and how it should be provided to community members. So there are lots of factors to consider when you're thinking of what might be most relevant and useful for a community. And some examples of this are the level of literacy in the community and the context of day-to-day use of the language in the community. So is it a language revitalization situation? Is the language used by people in their everyday activities, but it's not the language of instruction at the school, or it is not taught at the school? All of these contexts come in, they're relevant when you're thinking about what sort of output to produce with community members and for community members. And most importantly, obviously, you need to take into consideration what community members themselves would like. On the topic of community preferences, people might come to you with specific and achievable requests in terms of outputs. And if this is the case, that is brilliant. Good luck to you. Well done. Not well done, that doesn't work, but that's excellent. That might not be the case. People might come to you with a sort of vague idea or a very broad idea that needs whittling down to something achievable. Or just more defined. So it's a good idea to suggest when you're discussing possible outputs with community members, Suggest some resources or outputs that you think might be useful for the community, and that might help them come up with more ideas, or to help them extrapolate on their own or narrow down some more rough ideas that they have to what might be relevant and useful. And if there are any resources already in existence, um, oh, sorry, this is very obvious, but look at them to avoid doubling up, of course, reinventing the wheel, and also to use these existing resources as a basis for discussion of what works and what doesn't work and what else is needed. So, yeah, tangible ideas and objects would be really helpful in these sorts of discussions. Otherwise, it can be a bit theoretical and vague. So, moving on to levels of literacy. For communities that are literate, a written report in non-academic language might be appropriate. A report for parents, a report for schools, a report just for the community in general, and the production of a children's book, for example, might also be highly valued. For communities with low levels of literacy, oral presentations or video reports might be more suitable. Now, this isn't to say that something like oral presentations or video reports would only be suitable for communities with low levels of literacy. Being very accessible, these might be the most relevant for any community, a community with high levels of literacy too. So it's, yeah, it depends on the particular community. So here's an example of a picture storybook that was produced for the Karkat speaking community. And here's, you can see a picture of one page of the book or two pages of the book and a couple of kids looking at the book for the first time. So this idea, so Karkat is the language that Birgit, one of the sketch manual authors, works on. The idea came about from discussions about children's stories and songs and games, children-focused genres, basically, between one of Birgit's excellent PhD students, Henrike Frey, who was researching child-directed language at the time for her PhD, and so between her and families she was working with. And this idea of a picture storybook just came up through that. The book was made ostensibly for people to use at home, not as a school resource, but one of the women who were involved in these discussions, one of the mothers of the kids, she is an early years educator and actually does use this book in her classes at school. And this book was such a success. It's in the library that I helped crowdfund that, so the community now has. So the book's in the library. It's such a success that Birgit and community members are set to create and produce more. So that is a really lovely story and output. Okay, moving on to video reports. Carmel O'Shannessy, she produced 4 video reports for children's use of Warlpiri, an Australian language, in the different communities that she recorded children in. So these 4 different communities, she created one video report per community about what she found in her study of how the children use Warlpiri in these different communities. And here's a screenshot of the still of the first the video for Warlpiri. For the Lajamanu, they're all about Warlpiri, the Lajamanu community. And these videos, they were watched by many community members, but they also formed the basis of numerous training workshops with Warlpiri educators in the following years, or in the following, I think, 4 or 5 years, that were focusing on oral language teaching and learning. So they were produced to report back to the community, but also ended up being a really, really useful resource for teacher training. And we'll just listen to the very introductory bit of this Lajamanu report. Oh, yes, we will. Oh!
This is a report about children's Warlpiri in Lajamanu. In 2010, I recorded lots of children telling stories in Warlpiri. They talked in 2 kinds of Warlpiri, strong Warlpiri and what I call light Warlpiri, or the children call Lajamanu style. In this report, we'll see the pictures that they were talking about and hear the children speaking Warlpiri. I'll talk a little bit about what's great about the way that they're speaking Warlpiri.
Okay. And so she goes on and talks about, she does talk about grammatical aspects, so what they do with the verbs and various other things in sentences. But in lay people's speak, it's really accessible. There are pictures. She has excerpts of stories that individual children told. They're fabulous. They're a really great example. So here's a link to the Lajamani report, but you can also find links to the other reports as well if you want inspiration. And she also produced some videos of individual stories. So using these, she used these picture elicitation materials, pictures, wordless picture books to elicit stories from children in each of these communities. And so there are also they're not these. This isn't a report; it's more an output of narratives from individual children, anonymized and vocally anonymized as well, for the communities too. So, and I think they were used as, or they are used as education resources as well. Okay, another factor to consider is institutionalized support or the degree of institutionalized support. So for communities where there are services or there's the potential for services for such as speech pathologists or maternal and child support services, it might be worth considering some developmental language assessment tools or assessment resources that they could use. There's probably very little, possibly nothing available in terms of in this area. So, depending on the particular community and the services that are available and their wishes, such a resource could be very useful and highly valued. So an example of this sort of developmental language assessment tool would be a vocabulary checklist. So, I will briefly talk about two different vocab checklists that were created for Indigenous Australian communities. This one called the Early Language Infantry. So it's a local short form adaptation of the MacArthur Bates CDI. And it's a checklist to assess the vocab development of Aboriginal children growing up in a particular area of the country, so around the Katherine area, and they're all growing up in multilingual and or multidialectal homes. In the checklist, there are spoken words, and there's also scope to include gestures and hand signs. They created a training video as well about for how to use this checklist. You can see the link there. And also, I'll just point out this reference, Jones et al. 2020. They describe the process of creating this checklist in a really great detailed way. So if you're interested, that would be worth looking at. They talk about yeah, how they went about it. And here's an example of the checklist. So this is the low-tech, the traditional paper checklist, and you can see there are English word options in the far left column. They're Creole word options, and then there's also a column where you can put anything else that the child says and what language it is. There are hand signs, gestures. So does your child say this? Does he or she understand this? Oh, sorry, do they understand this? Do they also say or sign this? They also have an app. Again, still quite low tech. So this is a screenshot from the app. It's basically the same as the paper, but there's a little picture of the word. So this is bird in English, and there are the three Creole words for that as well. And then, yeah, what do you call it at home? What language is that? Etc. etc. So that is an example of the early checklist. And it is actually being used in other areas around Australia too, with Aboriginal children. So it seems to be quite successful. The other vocab checklist that we'll present here is another local adaptation of the MacArthur Bates CDI. It's called Little Kids Word List. Um, and it has been produced for work with Indigenous children in Central Australia. So it caters to all of these different languages, so Eastern and Central Arrernte, Western Arrernte, Warlpiri, Pitjantjatjara, Luritja, and varieties of English. It has spoken words, gesture, and alternate sign because in this area in Australia there's an alternate sign language. Audio and animation is included in the app. It's very high tech. And again, this reference O'Shaughnessy et al. This is a bit of a Carmel show today. Lots about what Carmel O'Shaughnessy has done because she's very, very good at reporting back to communities and producing excellent outputs. Again, they talk about the process of creating this checklist, and it's a really good resource. So I definitely recommend looking at both of those papers. Here's a link to the app, and here is a screenshot of the app. So the picture, well, the animation is of a woman waving, and the audio, so you can see there is one, two, three, four, five, six. There we go. I can count. Six different languages. So you've got English and all the other languages that were listed on the previous slide. And you can press play and you hear the word. So the English is bye or bye bye. I think bye or bye bye. I can't remember what it is. And for each language, you can hear the corresponding word for the animation. If the child understands the word or gesture or sign, you press the yellow button with the ear. And if the child also produces the word, gesture, or sign, you press the purple one. There's also, you can press a button to record yourself producing the word that your child says for this concept or item, if it is different. So this is a pretty impressive app. This is an example. This is a screenshot of an animation of a sign. So the hand is moving. Obviously, can't see it move here, which is unfortunate. And there's only one option here because it's not in multiple languages. Not note there aren't multiple audio versions. I mean, because there's no audio. So it's does your child understand this sign? Does your child produce this sign? So there are two examples, one high tech, one low tech, of successful adaptations of the MacArthur Bates CDI. It sounds like they've been really well received by communities that had a need for them. Okay, another factor to consider is context of language use. So for communities that teach the language at school or wish to teach the language at school, your sketch findings they could be used to develop or to adapt existing language teaching materials. So examples of this could be graded readers for children, so graded for age, for developmental level, or a report for teachers on what to expect regarding stages of language development, and many other possibilities as well. And you would obviously you can make suggestions, but in discussions with teachers and finding more about how they teach or how they want to teach, then I'm sure there'd be a lot more ideas as to what would be most relevant for the particular context. Where the language is widely spoken in the community, but it is not taught or used at school, the production of language learning materials may or may not be useful. As we saw in the Carcat example of the children's picture book, that was produced not for use at school, or not ostensibly not for use at school, but it has been used at school. Well, so yeah, who knows? It depends on your community. And it also might impact how readily accessible the feedback or output is if the language is not taught or used at school. It might not impact how accessible it is, but it might, and it's good to be mindful of that or to consider it. Okay, I will hand over to Rebecca now because she is involved in this. So, pitch and data teacher training. This is an example of various planned outputs or outputs that are currently in progress in for pitch and data speakers.
Awesome. Thanks, Lucy. So yes, this is one of those great examples where someone came to me with a requested idea that was both doable and suitable and all of that. So it was fabulous, and so it's great to be supporting her with this. So she's actually taking the lead in creating these outputs, and then I'm supporting based on the information in the sketch and the research that I've been doing. So Katrina Chide is a early years educator and general educator and um, um, no, word gone, promoter of language in the community. And so she suggested that we create materials about child-directed language in Pindara and showing how Pindara families are using all these strategies when communicating with their children that are common cross-linguistically and are research supported to kind of counteract this view she was seeing from a lot of the white educators that the Pindara families were lacking and needed to use child-directed language strategies from European languages. And so the idea is to create little videos which demonstrate some of these strategies in action and run workshops for teachers and early years educators around these, and also to create written reports to as an archival thing in the system for new educators to come in and be able to read and for people to be able to refer to. So she's doing the first of these presentations later this month, and it's still in progress, but that's the idea and what we're doing there.
Thank you. And apologies for that red line. I don't know how that happened. I wasn't even touching the keyboard, but I'm just going to leave it there so I don't muck anything up.
But it's interesting.
I was just underlining the importance of the pitch and data teacher training. There we go.
Awesome.
Okay. Another factor to consider is the vitality of the language. So community members might be unsure of how much children are using the particular language that is the topic of the sketch you're writing. They might want to learn about the extent to which children use this language. And so you could use the sketch to provide a quite neutral picture of the current language situation that could be really valuable to them. And findings from the sketch could potentially be used to create materials for language revitalization purposes. For example, language nests. If you're interested in knowing more about language nests, there is some, I don't have the references here, sorry, they are in the manual, but there are some great references about language nests with Māori children and Hawaiian. Oh, got there. My brain is waking up. So, for example, things that could be used, that could be really useful from your sketch in this situation could be routines and patterns that you find in your sketch data between caregivers and children. And it could be really useful for language teaching in like carrier phrases to introduce new words in a way that caregivers do. They currently do with children. So that could be a really useful bit of information. So when should you ideally do the community report? Our suggestion is that you discuss and plan the outputs that you'll develop for and with the community while you are undertaking your sketch, rather than leaving it until after you've finished, if possible. Obviously, and this in part, well, part of the reason for this is it is such an important part of the sketch process. We don't want it to be an afterthought where maybe you're swept up in other things and you want to do it, but you can't get back to it. So we want you to think about it before you finish your sketch. But also, discussions might take a while. So it might be a lengthy process. And it also might help speed up the process to know what sort of outputs you might be producing or what sort of report you will be creating. As you're doing the sketch, then you can keep that in mind and sort of take bits out ready to funnel into the outputs. And we also encourage you to include a summary in your sketch of how you report back to the community. Any outputs you create, how you give the information back. And the reason for this is that others can read it and be inspired by what you've done. So your non-academic work could therefore have an even broader impact than the very important impact for the community that you're working with. So in case you're interested, Here is the very start of the community report from the Inuktitut sketch. I mean, what would one of these seminars be without a section from the Inuktitut sketch, really? The one completed sketch. So this is how Hannah Lee and Shanley Allen started the community report. I'm really struggling saying that word today, community report, in their sketch. So a bit of an introduction, and then they list the various things, the outputs that were produced, and then actually also suggest other possibilities of how else the data could be used and the findings could be used. So they adapted the language assessment, remediation, and screening procedure for Inuktitut, so to give it more of a focus on morphology than other adaptations, because Inuktitut is polysynthetic in structure and has very rich morphology, and so therefore it makes sense to have more of a focus on morphology in this screening procedure. And they also adapted the MacArthur-Bates CDI. As you can see, this is a really I don't know if it's common, but it's a useful possible thing to do for communities for Inuktitut. So here is a screenshot of the screening procedure, the language assessment screening procedure. And just so you can, don't know what you want to do with that, just have a look. And here's an example of a section of the CDI adapted for Inuktitut, the word list. So that's all we have for the presentation. As Rebecca mentioned before we started, we'll come back after a break in September and we'll start talking about, well, we'll have presentations, a couple by us, but then hopefully by other wonderful people in the community about acquisition sketches in progress, or any questions you have or things you want to discuss, anything like that. Okay, and so now I will hand it over to all of you to see if you have anything to say. We'd love to hear your ideas.
I'd like to jump in a little bit.
Please.
For one thing, I would love it if you would provide for me the slides, because there's a lot of interesting links in there. I want to click on them and
Sure.
possibly add them to my big links page that I share with the world. And another thing, I got to say, the fact that you put these recordings on YouTube is marvelous. It's like a training resource and a study resource, and it's just great. I even put my best possible comment on one of them because of the fantastic. You can, if you do this stuff, the results are so great and
Yeah.
useful.
Yeah.
And this meeting right here really underscores how useful the results can be outside the linguist community even. That's great.
Absolutely. The slides we put them up on the website that's hosted by the University of Cologne.
That'll work.
Yeah, cool. I can find the link.
Yep, I just put the link in the chat.
Oh, you're so speedy.
Well, I was doing it while
While I was faffing.
So yeah, there we have a list of all the seminars we've done with the slides, and also a link to the YouTube recordings.
So does anyone else have any comments, questions? Probably all madly thinking
Hello.
about. Hi.
Yeah, I'm Celeste Escobar. Unfortunately, I joined the group only from the last session because I am in New York, but I'm a Guarani native speaker, and I've been documenting the acquisition. So it's a work of progress of a variant of my native language in South America, which is lower base in Amazonia, which is in danger. And I wanted to thank you very much for letting me join the group. I've been learning in these last two sessions and learning from all of you so much. And I'm expectant the next sessions I can keep following every month. And also the slides, thank you for the link. I definitely like very much the ideas. And the only idea I wanted to share with you that I did with the community were developing bisemantic fields in monolingual triptychs with pictures of the community. So the triptychs came out of the idea because obviously in subtropical climatic conditions, it's hard to have text. It's hard to have like papers. So this way is a easy way that the parents, the teachers, the people in the community who want to revitalize the language because it's not taught in the schools, especially for the first education level, they can just use it from their Android phones. So it's very easy, it's digital. They can download it as many times they want. And doing it by semantic fields helps them also to like repeat, see, show the, especially the 5 years old, 4 years old who are starting the literacy stage to have some background and written language because the tradition is mostly oral. So that's only I wanted to share with you as a another resource that I develop as I'm continue this work as a community return. And actually, I have very good feedback from the mothers because usually the teachers in the schools, because they teach hegemonic languages, they don't really associate the mothers involving and integrating them in this classroom. And the kids come coming from the first language, and then all of a sudden they have to learn how write and read these foreign languages to them. So having these small triptychs allow the mothers in the homes to be able to cover and make their native language other ways of just listening to the kids to also see it and slowly get used to the literacy skills in a very easy visual format. So that's only I wanted to share. I'm gonna put a website here. It's open to you to look at the website with its materials. It's in bilingual. It's in my native language and in Spanish, and I'm constantly updating the website with resources like this. But it's been working very well, the triptychs especially. Thank you
Fantastic.
very much. That's all I wanted to
You, thank you. Should have got you to lead this.
share.
I'm wondering if you have any advice for people who are working on, or perhaps in the future, I don't know if anyone currently is in exactly this position, but is working on like a corpus that's like pre-existing. Like, for example, if someone were like creating an acquisition sketch from like Child as Corpora or something like that, um, and who isn't necessarily like in touch with the community, or alternatively the community is like all Japanese speakers or something like that, where it's like super, super broad, and so it's not really clear like who you would consult.
Um, I wonder if that would be such an issue in the sketch context.
Well,
Um,
like I think it could be. So there's certainly some very large languages which don't have much acquisition research,
true.
and several people who are undertaking sketches of those types of languages. And so in that context, um, what it's harder potentially to consult with the community. What I would suggest though is to consult with a few people. Yeah, it's probably not going to be representative of the whole community, or capturing everything that everyone would want to do, or whatever, but to give a few ideas. The person writing the sketch may well be a community member themselves in those cases, not necessarily, but to kind of brainstorm a few different ideas and to, in essence, the key point is to try and make the more academic, well, to make the research and the findings of the sketch accessible to community members. And if it was, say, a language like Japanese, even though Japanese has a lot of material, but say like Irish. So I know that there's people working on a sketch of Irish, Gaelic, and yeah, you're not going to consult with everyone, but still a lot of community members aren't going to find the academic report accessible. They're not going to find it necessarily. They're not going to find it easy to read. And so to have another format of the information which is more accessible, then it would be kind of just for lay people, say. Or you might want to make one, again, depends on the context. So if the language is being taught in schools, you might want to make one for teachers, and make one for parents, with different kinds of focuses, and make them just kind of more general lay people reports of the information. And also these kind of community outputs and reports don't necessarily need to be, you do this while you're working on the sketch and then it's finished. So you could make these lay reports of the information in the sketch, and it could be several years down the track. Some teacher contacts you and says, hey, I read this. This is fantastic. Do you think that we could work together to make some educational resource based on this? And then if you have capacity and it's possible, then you could do that. So that, does that answer the kind of that big language thing? The other thing is if you're working on a child as corpus or something where you don't have a connection to the community, I think I'd probably encourage you to try and forge a connection to the community, to reach out to people and say, hey, I'm doing this. Could we discuss what you might want out of this, and try and do that. If that's really not possible, then again, I just try and make some kind of more generally understandable version.
Thanks.
And back to the first part of that, I think even if you're working with a small community, you're probably not going to be consulting with every community
No.
member. I mean, the community I work with, Wadia, it's quite factional, and there are some families in that community, it's a big community, that I have actually never spoken to, and I probably won't. I am open to it, but that probably just won't happen. Like I work with certain families, and so yeah, if I'm talking about community consultation, it will be with as much of the community as I can manage. It won't be all of it. Yeah.
Sure. And it's often weighted to a few rather interested people that you've happened to make contact with.
Yes. And the interested, engaged people are gold.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
Else?
Any other comments or questions?
Celeste, thank you so much for sharing that link. That I'm looking forward to going on and having a look.
Mm.
Well, I guess in that case, we can go. And yeah, so in September we'll be back. You'll hear through the channels that you hear about this. Yeah, we'll be back in September. Have an excellent few months.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye.